Hello all, how's it going? Can y'all hear me well? How's it going? It's Rezi Reviews here, yet again, with some Rezi Reviews. And this week, we are going to be looking at some heavy metal. Oh man, I love some metal. I love me some metal. Especially 70s metal. And the artist we're going to be looking at today is probably my favorite of like 70s metal in general. I mean, they're metal gods in general, but you know, obviously we'll get into it, you know, as we get further into the stream. But we're talking about Judas Priest today, arguably one of the most influential metal bands of all time, right up there, right by Black Sabbath. Going to be going through all 18 of their studio albums. You know, I might mention their live albums here or there. Might talk. I don't know if they're much of an EP band. No, I didn't see you know, any EPs of note that I thought, you know, I should cover. So, but you know, we're just going to be covering the studio albums, all 18 of them. It's going to be quite an expansive sound palette too, since these guys have been around no, almost as long as King Crimson have. They've been around basically for 15 years. So, without any further ado, I guess we can get right into it. So, who are Judas Priest? Well, you know, I've already said they're a metal band, but more specifically, they were formed in Birmingham, England back in 1969 by vocalist Al Atkins, bassist Brian Stapenhill, John Perry on guitar, and John Partridge on drums. They took their name from hey, Howie, how's it going, man? They took their name from a Bob Dylan song titled The Ballad of Frankie Lee and Judas Priest, but it's a damn cool metal band name in hindsight. You know, it follows in the provocatively religious naming tradition of early metal bands like Black Sabbath and, you know, the lesser-known Puppet. The original Priest lineup, those four guys I just mentioned right now, they would only last a few months before breaking up. But then Al Atkins, he joined up with this small-time rock band called Freight, which featured Ken Downing, who later go by KK, and bassist Ian Hill. That band, they would adopt the Judas Priest moniker in 1971, and then they gigged for a time with drummer Chris Campbell, but then as finances were sort of tight in those early days, Atkins and Campbell, they left in 72, and that made room for drummer John Hinch and vocalist Rob Halford from another small-time band, Hiroshima, to join. These guys, this lineup eventually signed to the independent label Gold Records in 1974, and at the label's suggestion, they added a second guitarist, Glenn Tipton, to expand the group's sonic palette. And like that, finally, the core lineup of what we often think of as Judas Priest was in place. Had to show up for this as a huge metalhead. Judas Priest is a heavy metal legend. Hell yeah, you know, obviously they've had, you know, some albums that have been stronger than others throughout the years, but, you know, I can't ignore their impact on heavy metal. They're just, like, such an amazing band. What else? Hold on a second. But yeah, no, all that was sort of preamble, what I just said to explain, you know, how, yo, Ben Kyle, how's it going? What was I gonna say? Yeah, no, all of that preface was just to explain how the band got to where it was. It's a lot more, you know, elaborate and confusing than the previous two band origin stories that I went into before. But anyways, under Gold, this new lineup, they went into the studio with producer Roger Bain, who, uniquely at the time, actually had some heavy metal bangers credited to his name. He produced the first 3 Black Sabbath albums and the first 2 Budgie albums. Oh man, Budgie. That's another metal band that I'd love to cover on here at some point, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Weirdly enough, though, whereas these past albums were largely left up to the discretion of the band, Vane was, how should we say, he was a lot more controlling with Judas Priest. He cut down Priest's live epic staple Caviar and Meths. He kept the band from including future Priest classics like Victim of Changes, Tyrant, Genocide, and The Ripper. And, you know, I'm not sure why. I guess he was trying to make them a more marketable metal band. Did they give off those impressions? I mean, in any case, what we got was 1974's Rocka Rolla. And now, hold on a second. This is the album right here, the one with the Coca-Cola sort of mock bottle cap on it. It's, how to say, I'm a Rocka Rolla defender. Now, there are some people that hate this album, getting this out of the way, because it's got a more bluesier, psychedelic sound than most of the other Judas Priest albums. But y'all know I enjoy that shit. So, to my knowledge, this is like the only Judas Priest album that features dedicated harmonica parts, a dedicated like noise guitar track. For some people, that may just be antiquated, you know, for an album. But honestly, this is just where heavy metal was in the early 1970s. It was more psychedelic, more blues-rooted. And for the time, the album, well, it's decent. I mean, there's some clear through lines to the band's later work. You can already hear, like, these very crunchy riffs, appropriate of Judas Priest, you know, on songs like Never Satisfied, on Winter, Dying to Meet You. It's also really interesting to see how they incorporate a more psychedelic, even proggy sound on this album. The opener, One for the Road, it's one of the only Priest songs I can think of with a riff in odd meter. Run of the Mill is also this epic, soft, 8-minute ballad, and Winter is grouped together with 2 other songs, the noise track Freeze, which I kind of mentioned before, and the softer Winter Reprise. That said, the band is, of course, still going through some obvious growing pains. Lyrics are somewhat inconsistent, and they go from talking about things like heartbreaking women to meta-commentary on the band itself, to more philosophical shit like the Steady March of Time. Run of the Mill is a lovely ballad, but it doesn't really go anywhere exciting. The title track may be a fun track in that early 70s way, but it doesn't, especially when you compare it with what's come after it, it's kind of cornball as hell. The closing, Caviar and Meths, you know, like I said, it was hacked down from like a lot longer, you know, they would go for like 10 minutes live on this song. But it's an unfinished sketch of a larger song. It's just like 2 minutes long, and it sounds neat. It sounds like, you know, the intro to some sort of like movie, like you can hear like a credits roll over it or something. But, you know, it's still unfinished. And Rob Halford, even though he demonstrates some great vocal range on this album, he doesn't really tap into his full dynamic potential. But overall, I would say that this album gets a C. It is, how to say, there's some great ideas on Rocka Rolla here or there, but they fail to really cohere in a way that makes the album anything more than a product of its time. It's a great early metal album, but it's no early Black Sabbath. Sadly, though, and most importantly to the band, how to say, Rocka Rolla was a commercial flop. It only sold like a few thousand copies when it was originally released, and even even with a label and regular gigging, the band were still in the same position they'd been in their early days. They went on, I forgot Judas Priest is still making music. I guess that isn't too surprising considering a lot of the 80s thrash metal bands are still making music. Oh yeah, I mean, what was it? I mean, bunch of old heavy metal bands are still going strong. Like Deep Purple, I think they're still out there, still touring. I don't know. That would kind of have some egg in my face for saying that, but whatever. What to say? Yeah. So yeah, the band Judas Priest, they were struggling even after they had this debut album out. They had a major label. They were gigging. They even went on like a TV program, the Old Grey Whistle Test, in 1975, and I mean, in hindsight, they look absolutely ridiculous. They're completely dressed in like frilly hippie clothing, and they've still got that Rocka Rolla sound, but even with this TV program, even with all this attention, they still weren't catching on with the charts. Members often went hungry at this time. They were literal starving artists, and Gold couldn't even support them because they were also struggling as a label too. It must have been like so freaking frustrating for Judas Priest. Reminds me, I have these friends down in Philadelphia who were once in a band, and I think it was garage rock trio. They were young, they were ambitious, and they signed with this one college label whose name I will not say, but rhymes with a particular brand of dragon-shaped dildo. But yeah, no, my friends, they signed with this label, and they thought they were getting a really sweet deal. They were re-recording like old material that they already put out, and the label promised a bunch in the way of promotion and like maybe getting a manager and that stuff. But it only really delivered on like the album because essentially, I think the deal was, it was a project more for like college students than it was any sort of serious label. But it was just like, I remember that being so demoralizing for my friends. So, I totally get where Judas Priest was coming from here. Yeah, no, it was really bad, Allie, and thankfully all of them are in a much better position now, making better music. But for a time that was really weighing on their minds. How to say? But yeah, no, because of all this, that sounds kind of scummy. Not gonna lie. Yeah, nah, it definitely was shitty. But yeah, as I was saying, Hinch, the original drummer, he left, and they replaced him with this other guy named Alan Moore, who I think they actually had in the band before Hinch. Like, they had Moore in the time briefly as a drummer. But he began to, slowly record, but the band, they slowly then began to record a follow-up album, which they would create on their own terms this time. It'd be harder edged, it'd be progressive, and all around heavier. The result was Sad Wings of Destiny, which I've got my mouse hovered over right here. You'll see the album with the angel, the gothic band font. Yeah, they're totally getting a bit more serious, a bit more dark. Yeah, I see. Probably not a good idea to sign with a college record label. Yeah, I mean, I think that's just one of the things you learn with experience. How to say? Oh, yeah, no. This album, Sad Wings of Destiny, it is so much heavier. The lead-off track, Victim of Changes, it's a Priest staple from even before Rob Halford was in the band. I think Al Atkins actually has a writing credit on this one, but it's a juggernaut of an epic. It moves from these hard-hitting, like, Black Dog-ish verse sections to this incredible section with dueling guitar solos to a more soft, ballady section which explodes into this thrilling climax. And right away, this track just completely shatters the Rocka Rolla Judas Priest. The production is heavier, less tinny, the riffs are catchier and memorable as hell. Rob Halford is shrieking his guts out over this titular woman who did him wrong. It's a tour de force of an early metal song, and shows the band were clearly following hot off the heels of their metal contemporaries, as some of them were on the wing. I'm looking at you, Black Sabbath. There are other bangers on this album in a similar vein. The Ripper, Tyrant, Genocide, and Island of Domination. They're loaded with great riffs, dual guitar work. Tyrant especially is one of my personal favorites on this album. It's just loaded with melodic riffs, and the guitarists absolutely let loose with all these synchronized dual lead solos. It's just so crazy how brimming with life these tracks are compared to the last album. They're loaded with energy and constantly moving from idea to idea, even when, or I guess because the band was pressed with their backs to the wall at this point, they were really firing on all cylinders creatively. And these songs, oh my god, they would absolutely rip live. This album is definitely a massive leap in direction towards a heavier, darker, less trippy sound. But that's not without its caveats. You see, in addition to bands like Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and whatnot, Budgie, there was also Queen. They were also technically... Hold on a second. Ah yes, screaming over getting your heart broken by a woman in a song. That's one of the most heavy metal things ever. Indeed. I mean, it draws from the blues, too. These guys were heavily influenced by the blues. What else? Yeah, I was saying, Queen. They were also technically, at the time, considered like a metal band. They were more operatic and theatrical, sure, with all their harmonies and piano. But make no mistake, underpinning most early Queen releases were some killer, sometimes double-tracked guitar riffs and a beastly freaking rhythm section. Like, I say all this because it sounds like Sad Wings draws a lot from early Queen. Multiple tracks in the album, in particular The Ripper and Island of Domination, they feature Rob Halford doubling up his vocal tracks to, somewhat thrilling effect, I think. Other tracks are just straight-up orchestral, piano-driven pieces, such as Prelude and Epitaph. They're fine for what they are, I think, but of course they're not the first thing my mind turns to when I hear the words Judas Priest. And also, the former is basically just deleting the Tyrant, so it's awkward on shuffled playlists. The band, they also again tried to write a ballad with Dreamer Deceiver and its companion rock track, Deceiver. Both tracks are good, especially the latter with its chugging riffs, its swung rhythms. Though Dreamer Deceiver, it kind of takes a bit to get off the ground, in my opinion. This actually highlights for me a problem with early Priest. For a while they weren't quite sure how to integrate their softer, more theatrical impulses with their heavier sounds. So they'd often just, have the heavy tracks and the softer tracks stand side by side to decent effect? I don't know. If you ask me, Dreamer Deceiver and especially Epitaph are kind of pace killers on this album. But in all, the album I would say is absolutely brilliant, and perhaps where the Judas Priest sound, twin lead guitars, shrieking lead vocals, driving rhythm sections, all that stuff, first began to truly emerge. Its slower moments sort of bring it down a bit, but not enough for me to give it anything less than an A. So, even with all the Priest albums that have come since, this one is still a thrilling listen. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. How to say, Sad Wings, it wasn't the smash hit that the band wanted, and, they were still growing increasingly frustrated with Gold's lack of support. In fact, I think Alan Moore left at this time because, they still weren't hitting it big. But it was successful enough of an album to attract the attention of the major label CBS Records, who signed them in 1976. Unfortunately breaking their contract with Goal in the process, which meant their first two albums were no longer owned by them, at least for the longest time. I don't know if that's still the case. But CBS, they gave them 60,000, no, wait, am I reading that right? Yeah, 60,000 pounds for their next album. By comparison, their budget for Sad Wings of Destiny was 2,000 pounds. The band decided to appropriately go big. They hired a Deep Purple bassist, Roger Glover, to do the production. And the resulting effort, Sin After Sin, it was released in 1977. Now, the most obvious change between, hold on a second, wait, actually, which one is it? Yeah, this one right here, the one with the looming sort of Roman-looking, I think that's a mausoleum? I can't be sure. But the most obvious change between this album and the previous one is the rhythm. Priest's drummers before, Judas Priest, at least in the early days, they sort of had a revolving lineup of drummers, if you couldn't already tell. But they'd all been like serviceable heavy rock drummers. But the guy that they got to drum for this album, Simon Phillips, he was I think he was a young studio drummer at the time. But he was trained in jazz fusion, and he knew how to use double kick drums. Consequently, even more so than before, the songs on this album, they're propelled by stellar, sometimes rapid-fire drum beats. Probably the most notable examples of this are the tracks Call for the Priest and Dissident Aggressor. These songs have killer chugging riffs, which are complemented perfectly by Phillips' pounding bass drums. It's especially perfect with the latter song because the drum part opens up so much space for Rob Halford's vocals to soar above as he's singing about stabbing and falling and all that stuff. Phillips certainly wasn't the first drummer to incorporate double kick into a metal song. No, definitely not. I mean, I think Rainbow was doing that. Even Deep Purple, all the way back on Fireball, they were, Ian Pace had, incorporated some double kick there. But damn, he was effective. And he was only 20 when he recorded this. He was freaking 20 years old and recorded one of the best drum performances on a Judas Priest album. It's incredible. I aspire to have that level of talent. Even Phillips' non-double bass drum playing was immaculate. Songs like Sinner, Starbreaker, Raw Deal, they all have these little flourishes and fills that give the songs such life and propulsion. And the past albums, they'd only tapped into that somewhat. I'm telling you guys, drummers make all the damn difference in a metal band. Think about it. Metallica and Slayer, for example. They're both thrash metal bands with drummers that complement their sound. But Slayer would fucking suck if Lars Ulrich drummed for them. And Metallica would sound a bit too overcooked if Dave Lombardo went to go drum for them. Drumming styles, they matter. They matter a lot. Take it from a drummer. But circling back to the songs themselves, Sinner is probably my favorite Judas Priest track. It's got everything. Killer drumming, gritty and wailing vocals from Rob Halford, funky meter shifts, squealing guitar feedback, and incredible guitar riffage and solos. For 1977, this song was a brilliant metal track. At this point, punk music, it was starting to emerge, so tracks like this were proof that the band could still rock hard in addition to bouncing the more technical finesse of their music. But other tracks, they don't slouch either. Call for the Priest, Starbreaker, Raw Deal, as I said, which, fun fact, is a song about gay leather clubs in New York City. Rob Halford wasn't exactly being subtle about his sexuality, even this early on in the band's career. Oh yeah, spoiler alert, Rob Halford is gay. But, how to say, what else? Oh yeah, Raw Deal, yeah, and the cover. They do a cover of Joan Baez's Diamonds and Rust, which rocks hard. It rocks really hard. It's a really good cover. But all these songs, they rock hard. They're loaded with memorable guitar riffs, solos, and Rob Halford's hard-edged wail. Like, it seriously, it keeps on developing really well over these few albums. Call for the Priest, it's basically proto-thrash with how fast and hard it goes, though, believe it or not, Judas Priest had yet to go faster. In spite of the heaviness and drive of most of the album's tracks, there are still vestiges of the old psychedelic, dramatic influence underpinning the album. Agreed, all instruments are important in making heavy metal music, and yeah, I think Slayer wouldn't sound the same with a different drummer. I mean, talk about Slayer for a bit. I mean, they have had serviceable drummers over the years, other than Dave Lombardo, but I definitely think that, stuff like Raining Blood, South of Heaven, what's the other one? Seasons in the Abyss, those albums are made by Lombardo's fills, by his kick drumming speed, like, oh my god, he's such a stellar drummer. Sorry, that was a tangent. But yeah, as I was saying, there's still a bunch of psychedelic, dramatic influence on this album too. The end of Sinner comes to mind with the timpani roll, and also there's multi-tracked harmonies leading into to Call for the Priest called Let Us Pray. But you also have full tracks like The Last Rose of Summer and Here Come the Tears. And once again, these are more balladish tracks, and they're nice, but they don't necessarily fit with the rest of the album. Here Come the Tears has this pretty cool rock outro, which leads right with the dissident aggressor, but The Last Rose of Summer, it's probably the most twee thing you could put on an album titled Sin After Sin. But overall though, this album is damn good and a promising start to their 13-year relationship with CBS Records. With the faster, heavier territories the band were venturing toward, it's fair to say that this is not just a retread of, but a further evolution from Sad Things. Still, I'd say it's held back a bit by the band's softer side, which they still have yet to reconcile with their heavier sounds. I'm also going to give this one an A. Okay, so Sin After Sin came out, and it wasn't really much of a smash hit, but it still would sell enough to eventually go gold. Priest would even play go gold in America, I should clarify. Priest would even play some of their first shows in America in support of this album, which excited them, honestly. It gave them a taste of their potentially massive, untapped American market, because keep in mind, at this point, they've been primarily touring around in Britain and Europe. They hadn't really seen America yet. But otherwise, while they were on tour, they had a new drummer. Simon Phillips, he declined to join the band after recording Sin After Sin with them. So the band continued on with this other drummer named Wes Binks, who, in my humble opinion, is one of the most underrated metal drummers of all time. This lineup would eventually return to the studio to follow up Sin After Sin. They produced the album Stay in Class, and then released it in February of 1978. Now, right off the bat, let's look here at this album cover, the Chrome Man. You can tell that this album is more refined than what's come to date. Not to judge a book by its cover, but look at it. It's sleek, it's polished, it's eerily sinister with this thing going through the dude's head. And it's the first album cover to feature the classic Judas Priest logo. But beyond that, the production is more sharp, it's less murky, there's more punch to it, and it especially helps the return of double kick on songs like Exciter. The guitar attack is still just as sharp as ever, and Rob Halford is perhaps at his vocal peak here. wandering between a husky chest voice and a pitch-perfect wailing banshee cry. This is the first Judas Priest album to truly scream metal. But going song by song, it's clear that this band's sense of metal songwriting has also evolved as well. For one, they experiment with faster tempos on songs like Exciter, pushing metal further and further into thrash territory. The delivery of songs related to sex and women troubles, it's also sort of been improved by their metal attack. White Heat, Red Hot, it's this absolutely electrifying song filled to the brim with memorable guitar riffs, pounding double kick. And then there's the cover of Spooky Tooth's Better By You, Better Than Me, which is this steady groove that's absolutely sold by Rob Halford's gruff lyrical delivery. Though that gruff delivery would later get him in hot water later on, but we'll get to that. It's in the album's darker moments, though, where it really shines, in my opinion. The lyrics on this album venture some really dour philosophical territory. The title track laments societal corruption, Invader deals with an alien invasion, Saints in Hell depicts a fight between angels and demons in hell, Savage decries colonialism from the perspective of an indigenous person, and Hero's End laments the early death of the good. The lyrics are one part of the equation, though, of course. The band's performances of these songs are just incredible. They're chock full of meaty metal riffs and a propulsive rhythm. The title track is such a nice gallop in the rhythm guitars, and Saints in Hell, oh my god, Saints in Hell. I love that song so much. It's Tool owes so much of their career to Saints in Hell and its riffs. Oh my god, such a good song. But nothing on the album, if you ask me, nothing compares to the album's emotional climax beyond the realms of death. Les Binks actually has a songwriting credit on this, his only songwriting credit, which is kind of more proof that he's awesome. But to get serious for a moment, the song addresses the topic of depression and eventual resulting societal and physical death from an empathetic perspective. And the music, wow, they finally nail the right blend of acoustic balladry and metal drive. They alternate between Binks' solemn acoustic riff and this loud metal heralded by Halford's shrieks. Tipton and Downing, they each take a beautiful solo. The drums flawlessly move from folk balladry to kick drum-driven pounding. They pretty much create the concept of the power ballad in the process. It's a beautiful song. Oh my gosh. So, I am going to go right ahead and give Stained Class an S. S for Stained Class. It's the sound of a heavy metal band finally shedding its early sort of bluesy, psychedelic roots in the vein of Black Sabbath or Budgie, and developing a metal sound of their own. The sound presented across the album, it was the most tonally consistent the band had been to date. Not a single track on this album is something that I would consider filler or overwrought, and they all rock hard while presenting the listener with vivid, emotional lyrics. This may never have been Priest's most successful album commercially, but it is perhaps the best snapshot of what this band was capable of artistically at its height. Definitely listen to this album. It is so freaking underrated in metal history. But after Stained Class, hold on, let me take a sip of water. After Stained Class, though, the band's image began to shape at an exponential pace. Rob Halford went shopping in gay fetish shops for leather gear for the band in 1978, believing that the leather and studs get-ups fit the attack of their music more than the frilly outfits that the band had been performing in up to that point. The band actually was pretty receptive to that, and from that followed a desire to commercialize and streamline their music, both to continue keeping afloat amid the continued rise of punk rock, and also to break into the American market. they quickly set about recording a more commercial follow-up to Stained Glass, Killing Machine, which was released in October of 1978. I think it was later released in the States in '79 with another title, actually, Hellbent for Leather, because I think what it was, America had gone through some sort of mass shooting at the time, and I guess out of sensitivity for that, the band changed the title. Excuse me. But anyways, to talk about the album itself, part of the commercialization, or the band's efforts towards it, meant a sort of general retreat from darker lyrical themes. That's not to say that the band wouldn't be visiting, fictional science fiction worlds in their lyrics in the future, but much of the songs on this album are about things like being a killing, badass macho man, making love, and just generally rocking and rolling. As I said with Stained Glass, that sort of thing definitely works well with the more aggressive, direct sound they cultivated, so this isn't necessarily an unwelcome change. I personally do prefer, though, when Priest ventures to darker areas lyrically, but it's clear that this album, in hindsight, was something of an experiment by the band to determine which commercial direction of several would work best for their future. In practice, these more commercial efforts, they worked for the most part. Delivering the goods. Hold on, actually, did I point out the cover of this album? This is Killing Machine right here. Sorry about that. That was what I was saying. Yeah, delivering the goods. It opens this album with a bang. It cycles through iconic riff after iconic riff. Hellbent for Leather and Running Wild, they're both songs with driving riffs and beats, which they make for really good motorcycling music. And Rob Halford agrees, seeing as how he likes to ride a motorcycle out on stage during live shows to Hellbent for Leather. Rock Forever, it's an underrated gem of a song with fun vocals from Halford and a really neat triplet groove in the double kick drum. There are also two pretty underrated songs about sex on here. There's Burnin' Up and Evil Fantasies, which make effective use of Halford's deeper vocal delivery and slick guitar riffs. My god, sexy songs, seriously. They're hot. And then, of course, the band, they cover a song by Fleetwood Mac, The Green Manalishi with a two-pronged crown. It's nothing that you'd be familiar with from Rumors or Tusk or any of their more commercial works, but it was like when blues guitarist Peter Green was in the band. The Priest cover, it takes the original song and it takes its blues rock origins and it sort of reinvents it with a straightforward metal sheen. It's not my favorite Priest cover, I think I like Diamonds of Rust a little more, but it definitely is a great reinvention. There were also, shall we say, lesser efforts. Evening Star is a kind of corny rock song with an even cornier key change at the end, and doesn't even have a solo. It's just sort of like a rock song, a generic rocky song. Before the Dawn, it's this lovely acoustic ballad, but it kind of feels out of place and like a relic from the band's psychedelic days. Take on the World, it's a very, very bare-bones attempt at creating a stadium chanter with a neat double kick groove, but very little else. Excuse me. The title track of the album, it's pretty good. It features KK Downing using tapping for the first time. Actually, no, I don't think that's KK Downing. I think that's Glenn Tipton. I misspoke, sorry. But yeah, he probably was inspired, listening to Van Halen's debut album, which had come out earlier that year. And it is neat seeing him use that. But I think the song's sense of progression between verses, choruses, and the solos seems kind of undercooked. And I think the band actually agrees with that, because a song on their follow-up album is pretty much the exact same as that song, but better realized. You'll see what I mean. Overall, I give Killing Machine a B. it shows the promise of a commercial Judas Priest with energetic, slick tunes to bust out live. In fact, most of these songs really do kill live, and because I don't think I'll be able to get a better chance to talk about this than now, if you love this period of the band, if you love the 70s Judas Priest, listen to Unleashed in the East, the fucking live album that they recorded in Japan and put out in 1979. Oh my god, it is like one of the greatest live metal albums of all time. And yes, I know that people, call it Unleashed in the Studio. Yes, Rob Halford did add like a few vocal overdubs here and there, but I dare you to name me a great metal album from like the 1970s or even like the early 1980s that didn't at least like put in like one overdub. I mean, overdubs are just a part of live recording. No shame in using them, I don't think. But anyways, enough about that tangent. The album's Killing Machine's more obvious commercial attempts, they kind of land flat, and it kills the pacing as a result. Still a great album to listen to, don't get me wrong, but there are some tracks that you might be tempted to skip through, and I wouldn't blame you. So the band was on fire touring in support of the Killing Machine, and Unleashed in the East, it was deservedly a hit live album. I think it was actually the first Judas Priest album to go platinum. Unfortunately, the band's manager, kind of screwed over Les Binks. He refused, the band's manager, it's kind of interesting to hear the various directions Judas Priest went to. Oh yeah, just you wait, we're not even like halfway through the band's discography at this point. So the band's manager, essentially when it came to Unleashed in the East, divvied up the royalties and whatnot among like Rob Halford, the two guitarists, and bassist Ian Hill, and Les Binks was given no cut, so, he was just like, screw this shit, and left the band. In his place, the band, I guess, in an attempt to further simplify their sound, brought on Dave Holland of Trapeze. Now, Trapeze, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Trapeze. They sound great, They've got a few great songs of their own, but we'll get to talking about Dave Holland later. Fresh with inspiration, though, from a tour in the fall of 1979 with AC/DC, the band gathered in Ringo Starr's estate in Tittenhurst Park. Actually, before Ringo Starr owned it, it was owned by John and Yoko Ono. So it was Beatles' hallowed ground that these guys were recording in. And they brought along producer Tom Alam, who would later go on to produce their other 80s efforts as well, to record their next album. The resulting album, British Steel, came out in 1980 and changed Judas Priest pretty much forever. So you know what I said earlier about drummers making all the difference in a metal band? Well, Dave Holland was a decidedly more, straightforward drummer. He was less jazz-inspired, couldn't play any double pick, and the songs are a lot more direct as a result. You'll often hear very basic rock beats throughout the album. Hell, the iconic intro of Living After Midnight is like second day of drum classes level basic. But to be fair, it does serve this type of music well. The riffs and vocal melodies, they seem to be more at the forefront this time. And besides, Ian Hill does a great job propelling the songs along with his bass lines. It may just be simple, basic heavy metal music to us in the year 2K21, but back then metal was not this genre known for its pop catchiness or its commercial appeal. So having a band with as focused sound and image as Priest made the hard-hitting music on this album so effectively appealing, I think. so much of this album is a fun listen. Breaking the Law and Living After Midnight, of course, they don't need any introduction to anyone who's ever turned on a rock radio in the last 40 years. But other songs like Rapid Fire, Grinder, The Rage, they're equally propulsive in their focused drum attack and guitar work. I love Grinder's riffs so much. It's just this thick, crunchy slab of steel slicing through the rhythm section. Metal Gods is also this groovy, almost disco-like track in a sense, which makes great use of vocal filters and recording metal sounds to simulate this rise up of machines like Future. United's it's another single. It might be a bit hokey, admittedly, but I kind of have a soft spot for it. This is the song that I was saying that does Killing Machine better. It uses the same sort of verse progression, but with a more ascending stadium chanty chorus, which is essentially Take on the World done better. Really, this is probably the most patriotic, American-sounding metal song that by a band that's from the United Kingdom. You can kind of tell they were trying to pander to the Americans. But the band, they join in on chanting the chorus at the end. There's a simple march-like drum beat. United, 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 we stand. It's all very Super Bowl halftime show. It's a hell of a commercial track, though. All that being said, I feel like they were simplifying things a bit too much here. Steeler, it's a great groove for most of the song, but it just kind of wanders off into an ending after a bunch of guitar solos over this static rhythm section. You Don't Have to Be Old to Be Wise is the longest song on the album at just over 5 minutes, but it doesn't really do anything with those 5 minutes that Living After Midnight, which, keep in mind, is sequenced right next to this song, already does better with 3.5 minutes. And I'm sorry, it's just a lot of the music doesn't rip me away the way some of the band's more, complicated, more drum-heavy work does with like Simon Phillips and Les Banks. Still great music, it's just not as my cup of tea. How to say? Okay, so this album, where would I put it? This might be controversial, but I'm putting it in a B. It is a classic metal album and a well-deserved commercial breakthrough for the band. Especially when they get a video for Breaking the Law on an upcoming television network known as MTV. But in hindsight, the large simplification the band undertook of their sound shaved a bit too much off, if you ask me. It exchanged their commercial accessibility for a lot of the edge and complexity. It exchanged commercial accessibility for a lot of the edge and complexity which undergirded their earlier work. Even the commercial efforts on Killing Machine, like some of those were a bit more driving too. I still recommend and love this album, but just understand, the band was still breaking in their new commercial sound. But along those lines, the band's newfound commercial success did put them in high spirits. After the British Steel tour, they flew off to goddamn Ibiza, Spain, of all places, right in the tropics, right in the lap of luxury, to record a follow-up in a state-of-the-art studio. Striking while the iron was hot, I guess, they decided to play it safe and release something as simple and effective as British Steel. Problem was, okay, so back in the King Crimson tier ranking stream, I coined the phrase doppelganger album, and that meant an album recorded hot off the heels of a recently successful predecessor, which attempts to essentially emulate what made that success possible. Point of entry is a doppelganger album to a T, to a fault even. The band practically recreate Living After Midnight and Breaking the Law with the singles Heading Out to the Highway and Hot Rockin' respectively. And the rest of the album is loaded with middle-of-the-road, commercial-sounding metal, which... Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, Heading Out to the Highway and Hot Rockin', right? They're both solid tracks. I like them a lot. Not the best songs Judas Priest has ever written, but they could easily pass as outtakes from British Steel. To keep on with other positives, I like Desert Plains. It's this steady, grooving song with a nice chug. And Solar Angels, it makes really cool use of guitar pedal effects to create this sweeping, sort of open, grooving sound. Otherwise, oof. To reveal a bit of my behind-the-scenes process for this review, I was actually able to review a bunch of their 70s and 80s output just mostly from memory alone, because I've listened to those albums so many times because the songs, vocals, the riffs, all of it is so intoxicating. With this album though, I had to re-listen to it all the way through again because I hardly remembered anything outside of the highlights. The ideas just feel really undercooked. Like, the leading single from this album, Don't Go, sounds like a mishmash of 3 different songs that don't really gel well together. Turning Circles and You Say Yes, they sound like songs any other rock band from the 1980s could write. And yes, I said rock, not metal. There is hardly any sort of metal edge in either track, and they just sort of happen. All the Way and Troubleshooter sound more like Priest, but they hardly go anywhere interesting that British Steel didn't already go to first, and better. The final track, On the Run, it's actually a pretty decent swung track, but at that point on the album, it's too little, too damn late. Much of the back end of the album is just a slog of okayish tracks. So, in my opinion, Point of Entry is Priest's first dud. It's got a few good tunes here or there, but it just does not gel. So much of the album spends time on undercooked or retread ideas that get the feeling that if the band was legitimately going for a more if they were really trying to go for a more melodic direction and not just, the commercial success of British Steel, they really weren't comfortable delivering more commercial directions. At least, not yet. But anyways, D. It gets a D. At least this album was under 40 minutes. And I mean, to be fair, it does have a pretty neat cover too. The original American cover is kind of worse, but the European cover is alright. So even though Point of Entry, it didn't really help Judas Priest. I mean, it still went platinum and whatnot. It didn't really hurt them either. The music video for Heading Out to the Highway, it was also MTV friendly, and the tour in support of the album was still a success. Still, it was clear to the band that they needed a more aggressive, tough approach than what they had recently delivered. They were on the cusp of cracking America, and they just needed that one final push, that extra oomph, that extra something, And so, in 1982, they went back to Ibiza to record their next album, Screaming for Vengeance. And as opposed to the last 2 albums, actually, I want to highlight this cover. Look at this here, classic Judas Priest album cover. The dynamic freaking eagle just dive bombing from the sky, right in front of like a red sun. It's so good. I love it. As opposed to the last 2 albums, I think Screaming for Vengeance pushes for commercial accessibility, largely while incorporating the heaviness and complexity which had come to define Priest before British Steel. Now, don't get it twisted. It's not like they're hopping multiple time signatures on this album or anything, but Rather, they seem to be embracing darker, faster metal sounds again. Dave Holland may still be an inferior drummer to Les Banks and Simon Phillips and whatnot. I don't know, that's still a chip on my shoulder, yep. But this time, he really seems to be drawing more from like punk than just straight AC/DC, and it really helps to drive the songs. The opening back-to-back of Electric Eye and Riding on the Wind, it really gets your blood pumping and sets the stage for an overall punchier album. It opens, oh yeah, and I should say, Electric Eye, it actually opens with this kind of neat instrumental intro called The Hellion, which is apparently the name of the eagle on the cover of the album. But again, just to kind of complain about my shuffle woes, I do wish that they combined this track with Electric Eye. But Electric Eye itself, oh my god, just to kind of gush about that song a bit. Its riffs, its pace, it kind of reminds me a bit of Sinner. But, obviously more contextualized in the 80s. There's also the really aggressive title track with a stunner of a solo and an abrasive shriek delivery from Rob Halford. Actually, on that topic, I should say, this album's probably the first to show Rob Halford's voice in transition. As he got older, and he actually around this time, he kind of started consuming a bit more. He consumed a lot more drugs and alcohol. It was kind of hard for him as a closeted gay metal singer in the 1970s, 1980s to really be confident in himself. So he channeled it all in pleasures in devices like drugs and alcohol. This sort of warped his voice, warped it into this more raspy, banshee shriek. I guess also the fact that he was, screaming his lungs out every night on the road didn't help things either. But I can't, I'll always prefer Halford's earlier vocals, but I can't deny his raspier falsettos synergize really well with the straightforward tough guy sound of 1980s Judas Priest. There are two other tracks that are more simple, ballsy rockers, Pain and Pleasure and Devil's Child. Halford's macho vocal delivery sells these alone. His vocal delivery alone sells these songs. And the band themselves, they have some standout moments. Ian Hill, he has tremendous restraint during Pain and Pleasure, only coming in during the choruses, which, I don't know, I think it gives a bit more dynamic progression to what would either be a pretty simple song. And then, what else? The solo section for Devil's Child, the band absolutely lets rip before they lead into this bridge in a completely different key, and Halford is screaming at the top of his lungs. Oh my god, such a great closer of an album. A lot of the a few of the songs in this album are still very much slower, more melodic tracks, but even these seem a bit more inspired this time. Bloodstone, Fever, Take These Chains, they're loaded with catchy riffs, expert vocal delivery from Rob Halford, and soft dynamic shifts which fit the track's more solemn moments. You've Got Another Thing Coming, that is a big one. It's of course, it's one of Priest's signature songs, if not their signature song. And well, I think it's just fine, but at the same time, I appreciate how great of a more commercial metal tune this is. It's a great chugger with a killer fist-pumping chorus. You've got another thing coming! Oh god, I couldn't do that, sorry. What else? Yeah, you look at live footage of them playing this song back in the day at shows like US Fest, or Us Fest, I think it's called, I don't know, US Fest, Us Fest, and you can see right away why this was something of a breakthrough song for them. It's like it was built for Priest's seas of heavy metal maniacs, as Rob Halford would call them. All in all, though, I really, really love this album. Admittedly, I have some nostalgia with it myself from having played it in the Rock Band video games back in the day. But I do really feel like this album is a far more thrilling listen all the way through than the previous 80s efforts, filled with iconic riffs, shrieking vocals, and probably the most energized Priest rhythm section since Stained Glass. It's no wonder that this was the big breakthrough hit in America. You know, music video popularity was one thing. But for this album, they showed that they had the ambition, they had the drive to muscle their way into the American music market while still essentially doing their own thing, following their own sound. You know, I don't essentially listen to every track so often, you know, some of the slower things, and You Got Another Thing Coming, I don't really usually feel in the mood for those, but overall, this is still an amazing album. I'm going to give it an A. Okay. So after Screaming for Vengeance crashed into the American charts, all sorts of doors started opening for Priest. The album, it went 2 times platinum, first of their albums to do that, and I think the only album of theirs to do that. Their tour in support of the album, the World Vengeance Tour, was also a smash hit. They sold out multiple arenas across America. The band, they also played to hundreds of thousands of people on Heavy Metal Day at the at US Festival, or the US Festival, as I said. Seriously, if you love this album, if you love Screaming for Vengeance, look this gig up on YouTube. Judas Priest US Festival 1983. It's fucking fire, to put it bluntly. Once again in high spirits, after the tour, the band returned to Ibiza again for a 3rd time to try to follow up their Thunderbolt success. They created Defenders of the Faith in the process, which came out in 1984. So now, perhaps realizing that the winning formula that they'd had with Screaming for Vengeance, they decided to dial it up even further on this album. Hell, some contemporary critics even called it Screaming for Vengeance 2. They were so similar. Is there merit to that comparison? Yeah, definitely, but I wouldn't call these two doppelganger albums. They're sure, on Defenders of the Faith, there are stadium chanters, there are aggressive, more progressive tunes, there are darker, more emotive songs, just like Screaming for Vengeance, but all around, the band just feels a lot more sure of themselves. This album also just sounds a bit heavier in general because of production, everything's generally a bit more reverberant, as if the band recorded in an old stone dungeon or something. So yeah, the first side of the album, absolutely brilliant. Free Wheel Burning opens the album with this cavalcade of fast guitars, propulsive drums, Halford shrieks, and it's followed up by this aggressive punk-like driving song, Jawbreaker. Then you got Rock Hard, Ride Free, which is this anthemic tune with incredible guitar riffs and dynamic progression, and Sentinel, which is this song with a really similar drive to Jawbreaker, but with a bit more, ambitious time signature switching. The most ambitious that the band had attempted since Sin to Sin, I think. But with this opening slate of 4 songs, Priest is able to, both excite the casual listener who may or may not be familiar with hits like Breaking the Law and You've Got Another Thing Coming, but also longtime Priest fans too, who may be more familiar with their earlier efforts. Side B of the album, the second half, is a bit more slow-paced, but it's no less exciting. Oh my god, I'm sorry, I completely forgot to point out the album cover for Defenders of the Faith too. Look at this thing, this creature on the front is called the Metallion, or the Metal Lion. I don't know, however you pronounce it. You say Metallion, I say Metal Lion. But yeah, it's another really cool, dynamic sort of album cover in a similar vein to Screaming for Vengeance. What was I going to say? Yeah, no. Side B, as I was saying, it's a bit more slow-paced, but it's no less exciting. Love Bites and Night Comes Down, they're darker and more emotional songs, which create some great atmosphere. Like, Love Bites especially, it's got this deep, recurring synth chord progression that sometimes sends chills up my spine. It's just like, boom, 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 boom. So effective. So simple, so effective. I love it. What else? There are two other great rockers on the side in the form of Some Heads Are Gonna Roll and Eat Me Alive. The latter of which is this driving, tongue-in-cheek song about forcing oral sex at gunpoint, and I mean, come on, Rob, you're not even being subtle here. And then the album, it ends on this duology of stompers, Heavy Duty and the title track, which, you can tell the band were eager to bring this on the road and bust them out live because they've got this simple clap-along drum part. They have these chanted vocals on the title track. These songs, they absolutely did rip live for the record, as well as the rest of the album. In fact, I think this is one of the only Priest albums which they played every track from live at some point. Like, especially during the tour, they played like most of the songs from the album on the tour. As well, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but, even though these are even though Heavy Duty and Defenders of the Faith are songs definitely intended for a live crowd and made for a live crowd, they're still brimming with energy and excitement on the studio recording. I mean, hell, the band even samples a live crowd cheering at one point to respond to, like, Halford's powerful shriek at the end of Heavy Duty. Oh my gosh, wow. What an album. Overall, I consider this album to be 1980s Judas Priest at their height. The band, they really deliver some killer performances here, especially on the first side, and as I said, every song is catchy, if no less technically oppressive. For a long time, I preferred Screamin' for Vengeance, but there really is... Sorry, Huey, you can hear that? There really is no denying how mature this album sounds by comparison. The band finally struck the right balance here, I think, between commercial appeal and heavy metal intensity, and created an absolute gem of an album in the process. It gets an S from me. There we go. Okay. So once again, as I was saying, the album was a platinum-selling success, and the band had another successful tour in support of Defenders, including a gig in New York City's Madison Square Garden that got so rowdy, apparently, they got banned for life from the venue. Fans were ripping off seats, generally raising hell and all that stuff. Pure heavy metal maniacs. After this, though, after the tour, the band, they decided to take a bit of rest. They didn't really want to play any live shows during 1985, except they did play like this three-song set for Live Aid in Philadelphia. Soon after, though, they began recording a follow-up during which the guitarists were experimenting with more guitar synthesizer technology. That might have been interesting. And, the band, they were originally thinking of making a double album called Twin Turbos, it would be half synthy commercial stuff and half heavy metal stuff, and had more than enough songs written and recorded for it. But I think it was like sometime late in the production, they scrapped the heavy parts and then they stuck with the more commercial synthy sounds for a slimmed down compromise called Turbo. I wonder why that was. Do you mean the hiatus? I don't know. I guess the band was just feeling really tired at that point. They'd pretty much been going non-stop since Sin After Sin, really. What else, though? As I was saying, the Twin Turbos, they struck it down at the end and made a more compromised commercial album in its ashes called Turbo, which is the one right here, which you know, has another dynamic, cool album cover, but don't let looks deceive you this time. That's all I'm going to say. Continuing onward. Let's say. Yeah, also, Rob Halford at this time, he really was not in a good state of mind. And actually, before I move to talk a bit more about that, just a bit of a trigger warning about like suicide. I'm about to talk about like suicide and stuff, so maybe like look away or listen away, or skip 30 seconds if you don't want to hear this. But his drug habits were at their worst at the making of this album, until he had a really unstable relationship with a male lover at the time too. And this kept on proceeding like this until one day the male lover, he ended up committing suicide in front of Halford. And yikes, no doubt traumatized, Halford checked himself. He checked himself rightly into rehab. So yeah, not exactly the most promising signs for a follow-up album to Defenders of the Faith. You know what? Give me a second. I'm gonna turn on my lights real quick. Okay. Yeah, as I was saying, Turbo did not necessarily have the best development history, shall we say. Though, to be fair, the idea of a commercial Priest sound which incorporated synths wasn't an inherently flawed idea. I mean, look at Love Bites. But also, the lead-off track for this album, Turbo Lover, it's some great fun. It fuses this motoric beat in the drums with this sweeping, flangy synth pedal effects, and Halford delivers these campy lyrics with all the sexual charisma of evil fantasies. It's like a sex bot song. Would I listen to it over something heavy like, say, Sinner or Rock Hard, Ride Free? Depends on my mood, really. But this song is the high point of the album, and the band must agree, seeing as how they played this one the most from the album in the years since. Unfortunately, there are still 8 tracks left, and most of them, well, even more puzzlingly, they decided not to feature synths, but they're just generic hair metal songs. How to say, this isn't a dig against hair metal at all. I love my hair metal just fine. Dokken, Rat, those are some great bands. But the thing is, so many of these songs just do not sound like Priest. Gone are the songs about spy satellites, post-apocalyptic badasses, even like leather studs and like being a badass, Instead, almost all the songs on the album are about love, sex, partying, wild nights, hot and crazy days. It's pretty much Poison's Nothing But a Good Time, but invented 2 years early. And Locked In, Private Property, Hot for Love, Reckless, they just do not stick in my head. The choruses of some of these songs are some of the least inspired and cheesiest the band had ever put to tape. And, hell, even Rob Halford admits that his drug abuse during the album led to a decline in his lyrical quality, and boy, does it show. To be fair, though, the band still does deliver good performances. The guitarists are on fire as always. Halford is still in good shape vocally in spite of his drug abuse. This is just competently performed hair metal, but hair metal nevertheless, and just a completely baffling career shift on behalf of the band. And also, Dave Holland's drumming is just back to being on this album. In fact, I swear that on some of these tracks, he's replaced with a drum machine. I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah, when a band forms a certain image of style and goes away from that image, it doesn't feel the same. It feels like you're listening to a different band. Oh, for sure. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no, Dave Hall and bad drumming, probably replaced with a drum machine on some tracks. I wouldn't be surprised. He definitely would be in the future, but I'm getting ahead of myself. There's also the song Parental Guidance, which is one of the few songs in the album to address a serious topic. That being the Parental Music Resource Center's lobbying of Congress back in the 1980s, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, and are too young or aren't as versed in rock history, this was essentially they were a lobbying group, the Parental Music Resource Center, and they went to Congress. They tried to restrict kids' access to music and kids' access to, like, you know, more mature, like, music that deals with themes like violence, sexuality, and all that stuff. And they tried to essentially treat it as more risque, you know, trying to make them like adult videos where you have to give warnings, you have to sell dirty records under the cover. You know, you'd have to enforce standards in the industry. It's exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. And in fact, they targeted Judas Priest by putting Eat Me Alive on their list of the Filthy 15 songs they found to be the most objectionable. On Parental Guidance, Priest, they expressed their annoyance at the group's actions. They wonder if this group, if any of its members had at all been on the receiving end at all of similar restrictions in the more puritanical times of the 50s and 60s, you know. Keep in mind, you know, Elvis, the Beatles, all those bands too were like dirty, vulgar at one point as well. They were considered dirty and vulgar by mainstream society too. And now, you know, the same people who were into them and our moms now are coming out swinging against Judas Priest, and it's like, where's your hypocrisy, man? The lyrics, I guess, but, you know, the song still kind of blows. It's just very generic, like a lot of the other songs in this album. One of the more well-realized songs on this album, though, is Out in the Cold, which actually delivers on the promise of synthesizers to create this emotionally solemn song about heartbreak. It's basically Fever, but with the addition of these layers of synth, and the result is pretty cool. If Priest had released Turbo as a synth metal album with more tracks like Turbo Lover and Out in the Cold, you know, I think it would have been a cool album, with still a bit of a step down from the harder sounds of Screaming and Defenders. In fact, you know, we've actually had a pretty good point of reference here. You see, Priest weren't the only metal band that adopted synthesizers in 1986. Iron Maiden, who were somewhat low-key rivals with Judas Priest back in the early 80s, they had that year used synths on their own album, Somewhere in Time. And the result was, you know, it was another classic Maiden album, if not as classic as, say, Number of the Beast or Power Slave were. With hard-hitting metal songs like Caught Somewhere in Time, Heaven Can Wait, Stranger in a Strange Land, and of course, Wasted Years. Priest, they very easily could have given us an album like that, but instead they delivered something that was... It just had very, very few ties to what Judas Priest had been up to that point. Overall, this album gets a D. I mean, are you really fucking surprised? It's goddamn Turbo we're talking about here. This album does have its moments, you know, especially if you like hair metal, but those are few and fleeting in the sea of just generic 80s rock. It's Judas Priest with all the edges sanded off, and it's just not what Judas Priest is meant to be. Their very name is provocative. It's Judas, the guy who betrayed Jesus, being a priest. It's edgy, man. And this album is just not. So much missed opportunity there, man. So much. That said, you know, Turbo... Actually, before I get ahead of myself, you know, I think I might take a bit of a break right here, just go out to the bathroom. sip of water, but yeah, we are about halfway through. I think I just finished my 10th album here. So yeah, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna go to the bathroom, and I will BRB. Yup. Yeah. Alright, I am back. Hello, everybody. Alright, so where were we? Take a sip of my water real quick. Yeah, as I was saying, though, Turbo, it was still a success, even if it was a bit of a Pyrrhic one. You see, while the tour and support was successful, it was Priest's final platinum selling album, and there were a lot of vocally pissed off Priest fans who didn't like the band's more sellout approach. Hell, the band hardly played any tunes written before Killing Machine anymore, and they abandoned leather and studs for a colorful getup once again. Responding to this backlash, Judas Priest eventually went back in the studio in 1987 to record a heavier follow-up, scrambling to repair their support in the metal community, which by this point had far, far more options out there for loud, heavy, and muscular metal than Judas Priest. But reworking old Twin Turbos material and writing some new stuff, the band eventually got out the album and ran it down the following year. Did it succeed at writing Judas Priest, though? I find it interesting that there was experimentation with synthesizers that early on in metal music, because that sort of thing has become a lot more prominent over the years. Oh yeah, no, like whole genres definitely have cropped up. You know, you got your symphonic metals, you got your, your prog metal definitely uses heavy keyboards. But yeah, back in the 1980s, it was kind of a wild west, I guess. A lot of metal bands were trying to see what worked, what didn't in terms of incorporating synths into their sonic palettes. What else? Oh yeah. So, did Ram It Down succeed at sort of recapturing that heavy Priest energy? Well, I mean, this album definitely rocks in a more priestly way than Turbo ever could have. The title track, it opens the album with a literal scream from Halford before delivering a song with fast guitar and quick rhythm section, reminiscent of Free Will Burning. You know, this is the title. Yeah, it's like, how to say, it's as if the band with this track, they were like, see, we can still melt your faces off too. Come on, guys. The following track, it's literally called Heavy Metal, and it opens with this shredding guitar solo, and it's loaded with heavy riff upon heavy riff. I'm a Rockers, it's exactly as it appears in the tin. It's just this mid-tempo arena stomper where Halford proclaims his pride as a rocker. Monsters of Rock is a sludgy closer with some pounding drums, appropriately epic title and all that. Problem is, how to say, so much of this album still feels artificial, insincere. Some of these tracks do rock, I really do like Hard as Iron. The title track isn't half bad either. But at the end of the day, so much of this album is Judas Priest going through the motions and reasserting their metal thread by telling, not showing, essentially. Few of the ideas explored here are necessarily groundbreaking or untapped on previous Priest albums. It's essentially a continuation from Defenders, but lacking the drive to further push the envelope. This album also suffers from its drum tracks. This is a more aggressive album than Turbo, but because Dave Holland couldn't really deliver on some of the more technical drumming on the album, the band had to bring in a drum machine for this one as well. Hard as Iron is a notable example, featuring killer double kick drumming in spite of the fact that Holland couldn't do double kick. But there's also clear drum machine on other less complex tracks in the albums, which really detracts from the whole return to roots this album attempted. Love Zone, Come and Get It, especially Heavy Metal, are heinous offenders in this regard. I mean, really, the song is called Goddamn Heavy Metal. And you're gonna undergird it with the rhythm section from the Human League. I mean, come on, man. There's also this god-awful cover of Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Good on here that Priest recorded for a movie. I'm sorry, I just realized I also forgot to show off the cover for this album, too. It's, this is one right here, the one with the, fist ramming down on the planet. Very aggressive album cover, that sort of thing. But just this album is, so kind of insincere and getting back to that Johnny B. Good cover, it's just they completely changed the music for whatever reason, which, why the hell, honestly, I would have loved to hear Judas Priest let rip over a 12-bar blues progression like what the original song is, but the music they replaced it with, man, it's so boring and cheesy. Is it possible for something to be so boring and cheesy at the same time? I mean, this is. It suffers from both the going through the motions and its use of drum machine, and it's a funny story about the song. Why does this song exist? See, in 1986, when Judas Priest were recording Turbo, or I think it was 85 or 86, around that time of Turbo, they've been approached by a Hollywood studio to contribute a song for this film about, air fighter pilots, dogfighting, wingmen, and all that sort of stuff. Camaraderie. Priest looked at the movie and they thought, I don't think it probably won't be that successful. And, they were like, nah, we got plenty of songs in Turbo, we'd love to, sorry, I'm telling this wrong. It was the Hollywood studio that wanted them to contribute Reckless to this film. But Priest were just like, nah, this film is probably gonna flop. And so they declined. Turns out, Top Gun was one of the highest grossing films of 1986, so Judas Priest were... they were really sort of smacking themselves after that massive breakout. Instead, we got, though I guess the good side of this, the good result of this timeline is we got Kenny Loggins' Danger Zone out of this, so, it all sort of bounces out. But anyways, Priest, when it came time to recording their next album, they were approached again by a major Hollywood studio to contribute to a movie soundtrack, and they were like, well shit, we don't want to miss any potential hits this time, and so they threw in the Johnny B. Good cover for this apparently god-awful comedy film of the same name in 1988. Well, it's not spelled the same. It's Johnny B. Good, as in the words B and good. But, yeah, no, it was kind of an embarrassing moment in Priest's history. Sorry, but that was a long tangent. Getting back to the songs on Ram It Down, a definite highlight of the album is the song Blood Red Skies. It's this epic, near 8-minute song, and the track actually makes pretty decent use of the drum machines in addition to layers of synth to paint this image of a dystopian future. It's like Rotten Amadeus was sent to hell and back. And meanwhile, the guitar work is brilliant as usual. Halford's delivering the dramatic vocals spanning like his entire range, from these low tones to these shrill shrieks. Again, not to harp on Turbo some more, but this is really the sort of work that shows the promise of Priest, mixed with electronics and synths. Priest, they're no industrial band, sure, but the right synths really can bring out particular facets of the metal attack, in my opinion. So, all in all, Ram It Down. I think it's an improvement on Turbo, but that alone doesn't say much. Excuse me, it shows Judas Priest struggling to reconcile their heavier, more aggressive sounds at a time when so many other young, hot metal bands, especially those in the thrash scene, were creating similar sounds almost effortlessly, like Metallica, Slayer, Anthrax, the big four of thrash, Megadeth, Testament, Exodus. All those bands were coming up and showing just, pure wickedness all around, and Priest simply weren't. It seemed by comparison that they couldn't really compete as well as they used to. The thing is, too, this album, it could have been a lot worse. At one point they were in collaboration. Priest was in collaboration with the 1980s pop mega masters, Stock Aitken and Waterman, better known for other hit 80s songs, including a little-known track called "Never Gonna Give You Up." And they were actually deep into the process, had a few songs recorded before their management put the kibosh on things. Thank God. But as it stands, Ram It Down is just an okay metal album. Far from Judas Priest's works, but it's not really the most engaging listen. So, after the Ram It Down tour, during which the band had some killer performances, and seriously, I don't get why the band haven't released any official live performances from this time. Rob Halford was screaming his guts out. Oh my gosh. Dave Holland, at the end of the tour, he finally parted ways with this band, and honestly, thank God. Yeah, sure. I have that chip on my shoulder of him being this, sometimes really boring drummer. But also, he would later go on to be a convicted sex offender too, so the band really dodged a bullet there, is what I'm trying to say. In his stead, they brought on the speed metal drummer, Scott Travis, who performed in this little-known, they tried to make it big, but they couldn't really break through, band called Racer X, and this formally brought the double kick drum back into the band. The faster, more driving approach that they hinted on Ram It Down, they can now fully bring it into fruition, and the band once again hit the studio in anticipation of this. They were really excited, kind of drawing more from old albums like Stained Class. Not all was well during this time of transition, however. You see, and again, I'm going to preface this with a bit of a trigger warning. Again, talking about some suicide. You might want to skip ahead like a minute or so. But in 1985, two Nevada youths from Shitty Home Lives, James Vance and Raymond Belknap, I believe the names were, they got crossfaded one night. They put on Stained Class. They were huge fans of Judas Priest. They hyped themselves into agreeing to a death pact during the album's somber moments, and They blew their faces off with the 12-gauge shotgun. Belknap, he immediately died, but Vance, he lived on for 3 more years with a mangled face. The kid's parents, they immediately sued Judas Priest. They alleged that subliminal messages, on Better By You, Better Than Me, were telling the teens to do it. It led to the, dang, yeah, I wouldn't like someone like that in my band either. Like I said, dodged a bullet. But yeah, as I was saying, these parents, they thought that Priest was hiding subliminal messages in student class, telling these teens to freaking do it, leading to probably the most high-profile trial over subliminal musical messages in metal history. I think it's Vance Family versus Judas Priest or something like that. They made a documentary about it. It had so much publicity. Priests, they were innocent, of course, and the court eventually did find them as such in the summer of 1990, but it was still a startling reminder to them that no matter how much they tried to commercialize metal, no matter how much they tried to appeal to a broader crowd, there would always be this subset of people who viewed what they did with suspicion. They were corrupting the youth, they were turning them to Satanism or suicide, etc., etc. I guess it's all the more fitting then that their next album, that was dropped literally weeks after the trial had concluded, it's perhaps their most uncompromising album in years. A true, aggressive beast of a recording. Its name? Hell, man. Its name. Painkiller! Oh my god, wait, hold on a second. I just realized I didn't ram it down into C yet. Oh my god, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, Painkiller! So Painkiller, right from the start, you can hear a difference in approach this time around from Ram It Down. It still starts off with a bang, but the title track leads the album off with this flashy drum solo from Travis before launching into probably what's actually the most electrifying metal track the band had made since Defenders, if not the 1970s. Halford is in shriek mode for pretty much the entire song. Glenn Tipton and KK Downing, they absolutely shred their solos. They let loose feedback squeals. Ian Hill and Travis, they lay down this absolutely demolishing rhythm section. That double kick, oh my god, double kick drumming during the choruses and bridges is so thrilling. And this track, oh my god, Painkiller, it is a certified Priest classic and another must listen by them for any aspiring metal fan. This is probably the last essential Judas Priest song that you need to listen to if you're a heavy metal fan. I cannot stress that enough. The other tracks on this album, though, they contain a similar aggression. Hell, the first half of the album after the title track, it's lined up back to back with tracks showcasing the band's new sonic attack. Hell Patrol, All Guns Blazing, Leather Rebel, Metal Meltdown, they're all driving songs with sick guitar riffs and solos. Now, unlike Ram It Down, it feels like the band are actually trying to map out new territory with these songs. They're verging on sounds and tempos very similar to thrash metal, but with a distinct Priest edge due to Halford's gruff vocals and piercing scream and the twin guitar attack. Of course, as the titles might suggest, the band are back to singing about darker topics like battle, death, monsters, and fictional beings like the titular Painkiller. These, paired with Halford's vocal delivery on this album, gives one the impression that Halford is at his most wicked here. This is, oh my gosh, this is the band that the PMRC, that the Vance family warned you about, alright? Not just some fossils attempting to constantly recapture their commercial success from the 80s. The second half of the album, meanwhile, it offers up more sonic variety while still mostly keeping tonal consistency with the aggressive first. So you got the song, Nightcrawler. This is great track alternating eerie, soft, arpeggiated riff sections and this powerful driving rock. Between the Hammer and the Anvil, also a banger. A Touch of Evil is the only song on the album with a prominent synth part, and it definitely is the most commercial sounding song on the album. It stays at a mid-pace groove for pretty much the whole song, and to be fair, it is far better than the more commercial songs that the band was pumping out with Dave Holland at the end of the 80s, but that said, when compared with the speed of the rest of the album, it does feel a little out of place. One Shot at Glory is a powerful, almost galloping closer to the album. I love the part with the twin guitar triples against the duple kick drum beats, paired with the it's so thrilling. I love it. But it's got this preceding instrumental opener called Battle Hymn, which, it's neat. It's a nice little guitar solo, but it's not the most memorable thing on the album. Again, something which probably shouldn't have been merged with One Shot at Glory, so that the shuffle would be all screwed up. But overall, though, oh my god, this album is a brilliant reinvention of the Judas Priest sound, which both it revisits their old glory while at the same time moving Priest in a bold new direction right alongside the bands they inspired. In fact, when they toured in support of Painkiller through 1991, they brought along a bunch of other supporting acts, like heavy ass supporting acts like Metallica, Megadeth, Testament, Annihilator, and they even brought Pantera on board, who had freshly reinvented themselves. I say freshly reinvented. Stay tuned for that. I'm probably going to have another Pantera episode coming at some point where I explore them. With this album, Painkiller, the band, they were reasserting their position as the granddaddy of heavy metal as it existed at the time. The speed, the aggression, the darkness, it's all there. And it's dialed back up to 11 after several years of the band fiddling with the knobs. There are some less than strong moments in the second half which hold it back from being a masterpiece, but I feel great giving this album an A. So, let's do it. Okay, so yeah. Painkiller, it was hailed by critics as a return to form, and Priest again killed it on the tour in support of it, Even kind of killed Rob Halford a bit. Not literally, obviously, but he did suffer a pretty brutal injury when, at one show, he rode his motorcycle across stage as usual, but I think there was too much smoke going on and he couldn't see where he was going, so he accidentally crashed and broke his nose on stage. Still performed the show like a champ before going to the hospital, but that was not a pretty moment. But speaking of Halford, he was drifting. He was kind of drifting further from the band towards more aggressive metal sounds, groove metal, and he even formed his own project around this time called Fight. You going out? Yeah, okay. No problem, man. If you want to hear about the later albums, be sure to stay tuned. Like always, I'm gonna timestamp this album after. I'm gonna timestamp the stream after the fact, so you can hear you can skip to individual album opinions if you want to hear that. As I was saying though, So Halford was immersing himself in these other projects, and sadly, this eventually resulted in miscommunications with the rest of his band that eventually resulted in his departure. And then, there were a bunch of nasty words traded between the two camps throughout the 90s. But in either case, in the meantime, Priest they were left adrift. After a few years looking for singers, they would eventually find a decent replacement, I guess, in Tim Owens. He was this Judas Priest tribute singer who, got his origins in the Judas Priest tribute band and now singing for Judas Priest. That's crazy, man. I mean, was it? Yeah, he was this tribute singer. He'd later get the nickname Ripper. But yeah, with Ripper in tow, they recorded this new album in 1996, and then they would put it out the following year as, let me see if I can show you the cover here. This one here, Jugulator. Though that's not quite the original album cover. The original album cover is like a propped version of this with like the face, and it looks really, really bad, but never mind that. How is this album? Naturally, with Halford gone, there's this huge hole for the band to fill. So, how exactly is Ripper on vocals? How does he sound in this album? Well, it certainly shows. He can hit those high notes like Halford. He's not as convincing in his lows, I don't think. And maybe that's not fair, given the gradual evolution of Halford's voice of the early Priest albums. But I mean, Ripper was in Priest. He was in a Priest tribute act before, so he clearly knew a thing or two about Halford's singing styles. He just couldn't replicate Halford one-to-one, which, that's all well and good. Ripper's a damn good singer in his own right, but I just prefer Halford's voice with Priest's music. Hell, Rob Halford at this time, like I said, he was doing groove metal, he was doing industrial metal, and as we'll get into with this album, those are two styles that Priest was also dabbling in, so, it could have been cool hearing Rob Halford bust out some of the songs on this album. But, things that will never be. But anyways, Ripper's introduction is just one element of the new Priest. The band, they were also experimenting with the darker tunings, more pounding rhythms, very in line with a lot of the groove metal that was coming out in the mid to late 90s. And honestly, Scott Travis's debut on Painkiller was electrifying, but he really shines here amid all the down-tuned guitars and the groovier riffs. The title track, which leads the album off, it progresses from this eerie industrial soundscape to a double-kick-driven banger with a few odd time signatures here and there. Bloodstained is the stomper with this somewhat abrasive guitar solo. Death Row is an absolutely pulverizing track, sold by Travis's drumming and Ian Hill's bass playing. Like Ian Hill and Scott Travis and bass combination in combination together, they are a really good pair. Like Scott Travis has really pushed Ian Hill to areas that I don't think he's ever explored before in a Priest album. But I feel like in addition to groove metal, like I said, the band was blasting a lot more industrial metal in developing the music of this album. You can hear like some industrial samples, like I said, on the title track, but also it generally feels there are more abrasive, mechanical sounds on this album than past Priest works, in particular in the guitars. And I mean, I guess for this new Priest sound, it works. Industrial samples really do pair well with the groove metal riffs. It's just, I don't know, I guess I just prefer the more straightforward, speedy metal sounds of albums like Stained Glass and Painkiller. If I want to listen to industrial metal and groove metal, my first choices would be bands like Pantera, Machine Head, maybe KDFDM, Nine Inch Nails, not Priest. The highlight of this album, for me at least, is probably the closing track, Cathedral Spires, which is probably the most traditional sounding Priest song on the album, how shall we say? It's this epic ballad with appropriately operatic vocals from Ripper and slow, crushing grooves from the guitar and bass. This is probably the closest the band has come since Stained Glass to hitting the same sweet spots as Beyond the Realms of Death, in fact, if not necessarily with the same musical finesse. The choruses on this song are probably the most lyrical, melodic moments on the entire album, and I think part of the reason why this track has stayed in my memory banks more consistently than the others. I remember being, 12, 13, and I think it was like this one streaming service I forget the name of, but I saved Cathedral Spires on like Judas Priest playlist because I really did enjoy it at the time. It still kicks ass nowadays though. How to say though? I honestly, so I think this album suffers from the same problem that plagues a lot of 1990s albums. like I was saying on the King Crimson stream, mainly it just goes on too damn long. The album's nearly an hour long, and it really shows in certain areas. The lead-up track, sure, make that lengthy. The closer, sure, it's a grand conclusion, sure, make it lengthy and all that. But most of the other tracks on this album tend to overstay their welcome. Each song is, on average, about 5 minutes long, and this becomes especially rare on the album's latter half. Burn in Hell has some damn cool riffs in the verses, and a killer chorus hook that makes great use of Ripper's vocal highs, but you could hack like 2 minutes of build-up and jamming and the song would still be fine. Hell, the band themselves did that when they released it as a single, and it sounds great. Brain Dead is a great heavy song with haunting lyrics about someone who's lost sight, hearing, and motion, but it has a few too many ideas, and same with Abductors and Bullet Train. They're also cool songs, but again, they have a few too many things going on for me to really feel like revisiting them from time to time. Overall, I'm going to give Jugulator here a C. The band, they deliver some great performances, and Ripper does what he needs to do to establish cred as the new Priest singer, but so many of the songs just feel overwrought. It's not necessarily a bad album, just bloated, I'd recommend it, especially to groove metal fans, but with the added caveat that it can be a bit of a hit and miss. So, after Jugulator came out, though crowds of people still came out to the live shows, there was a more mixed reception to the new Priest. The band, responding to this, believed that they had gone a bit too hard for groove metal sound and decided to try and return to the more simplified roots, similar to the work they'd done in the 80s, or at least Painkiller. At the same time, though, the metal world was continuing to rapidly shift around them. Groove metal was on its way out of mainstream popularity, and in its place rose new metal with bands like Korn, Limp Bizkit, and Disturbed. The bands, they would eventually they attempted around this time to compete with these edgy new competitors by adopting a more downtuned, harder-edged sound. The album that resulted from these ideas buzzing around was 2001's Demolition, this album right here, which it's become a bit infamous, shall we say. I was fearing listening to this album. I haven't, all these albums, I think it was, I've listened to Jugulator all the way through, but I think all the albums from Demolition onwards, I haven't listened to, so I was kind of fearing listening to this one because I'm already well familiar with its reception. Critics at the time panned this album, and fans hated it too. Is it really that bad though? Well, the opener, Machine Man, starts things off well enough. It's got this driving double kick groove, these fast down-tuned guitar riffs, a strong vocal from Ripper. The guitar solos are also pretty killer. It's like a cut-up Painkiller, but just down-tuned a bit. But then I look at the next two tracks and see that they're both 6 minutes long, and a pit in my stomach starts to form, and oh god, this album is too damn long again, isn't it? Okay, so, well, one-on-one. It starts with the same sort of groove and chug as Living After Midnight, and I do like the little guitar riff in the chorus. However, it goes on like 3 minutes too long, and it hardly develops beyond the verses and choruses, and oh god, is that Ripper attempting to rap in the middle? Oh no. Anyways, Hell is Home, the next track. It starts off with an acoustic intro before bursting into a slow headbanger riff, which is neat, but doesn't this song sound a lot like Alice in Chains? I mean, there's even a section where Ripper harmonizes with himself that sounds exactly like a cut off of Dirt, or like the self-titled AIC album. Thankfully, after 16 minutes, though, the band tapers off with a few shorter songs. Jekyll and Hyde is this great little driving song about violent personalities, which would sound right in line with classic Priest. It's even got this cool like synth part going on in the background. Like I said, synth does complement Priest's metal attacks sometimes. Devil Digger is also decent, if a little less memorable, but Now, the most confusing track in this little 3-song run in the early part of the album, the most confusing track in this run of songs, though, is Close to Me. It's this synth-laden power ballad, which it pretty much sounds like if Judas Priest attempted to do their own version of the Scorpions' Still Loving You, but released it on Turbo, but held off on it for like a few decades and then put it out when nobody was expecting it. It's not bad, but what the hell is it doing on this album? So unfortunately, that's the end of the short song runs, but unfortunately for the rest of the album, we're presented with these 5-minute plus songs after 5-minute plus songs. And again, just like keep harping on about this, with Pink Crimson and now the Judas Priest streams, I just want to clarify, I've got nothing wrong with 5+ minute songs themselves. I listen to progressive rock. It's just that Judas Priest and a bunch of other bands around this time, they really could have stood to pace their albums a bit better. Like Soundgarden, Super Unknown. It's about as long as this album is, but it's leagues better to listen through because it's short and long songs. They're woven together brilliantly. There's more, I don't know. It has a better sense of itself, I think. Not so here with Demolition. For what it's worth, though, I will say there is a bit to love in this part of the album. Blood Suckers. It's probably my favorite Ripper era track. It's a harsh attack on paparazzi with a driving attack reminiscent of 1980s Priest. And oh my God, Ripper's vocals in the chorus. It's pure alpha. He outdoes himself there. Cyberface. It's also pretty cool. It's a sludgy song about another fictional computer menace, and it's the only Priest song co-written by Scott Travis. Shame he hasn't written more because this track actually hits hard. And also, Beat on Me. It's got this pretty cool solo section. It's very shocking, like something like that. Otherwise, this part of the album feels weird. In between, it's this song with corny lyrics about always embodying two extremes, good and evil, love and hate, etc., etc. It features some screamed vocals from Ripper, like screamo stuff. Subterfuge. It starts off like a classic 80s Priest song, but then it introduces buzzsaw guitars and drum samples and starts sounding like a Korn track with high-pitched vocals. God, the closer, Metal Messiah, Ripper tries rapping again. It is so painful. Oh my God, seriously, dude. Stick to what you know. I understand now. Why critics made comparisons to this album and new metal. Some of these tracks sound almost indistinguishable to what a lot of other metal bands like Disturbed, Korn, even Limp Bizkit were doing at the time, save for like a banshee wail here or there from Ripper, Subterfuge, I will admit, it still kind of low-key slaps though. There's also another soft ballad in Lost and Found. The way it progresses, it kind of reminds me of something like Dear God by Avenged Sevenfold. It's mostly acoustic and looking outside metal, but it's still tied to metal inclinations like Ripper's voice, synthesizers, and electric guitar overdubs. Again, though, why is this here? I thought Priest had left pace-breaking soft ballads behind in the 1970s, but this album has two. And they're not even as good as songs like The Last Rose of Summer, in my opinion. All in all, this album is... Demolition is nowhere as awful as critics said it was. In fact, hot take, I might even like this one better than Jugulator, if only because some of the songs sound closer to classic Priest while still maintaining the double pick attack on others. But at the same time, I can't deny that this album has some serious pacing issues. It tries to give the bit to so many different crowds, some opposed to each other, the Painkiller fans, 80s Priest fans, new metal fans, grunge, alternative fans, mainstream music fans, and so on. It only leaves a jumbled, bloated mess of an album in the process. as it turns out, the problem with Ripper-era Priest was never Ripper's voice, but just the confusion of the band attempting to remain relevant in a modern metal world by incorporating elements of emergent metal subgenres, but not truly succeeding at any. Demolition gets a C. Okay. So, the band, after this, they went on tour with Demolition, but by that point, the calls were getting louder and louder in the Priest fan base to bring back Rob Halford's reunion. Or to reunite with Rob Halford, I should say. Halford, he was doing pretty well for himself at the time. He was touring and recording with his own self-titled band, but he was also facing calls to reunite with Priest. Eventually, though, tensions lowered between the two groups to the point where in July of 2003 the two parties reconciled and then they announced a reunion. Ripper at the time, I think he was still in the band when this actually happened, but he was polite and he stepped aside and I guess he understood as a fellow Priest fan himself the gravity of the situation. He'd actually go on to later do his own solo stuff, I think, but also he performed with Ice to Earth. But anyways, Halford was back in the band, and he was still in great vocal shape. The band they had a new logo. It's actually the logo that I used in this thumbnail, the one with the cross in place of the T. The cross had emerged, it actually originated on Sad Music Destiny and was later referenced on the cover for Painkiller. But Priest are referencing a lot more nowadays. So yeah, what was I going to say? Yeah, they had a new logo. Rob Halford still had a great voice and was performing really well with these guys. They played a bunch of killer live gigs in 2004, including a bunch of stellar performances at Ozfest apparently. Yeah, remember Ozfest? Oh my god. What else? And they had an album on the way. They wanted to start recording an album. And they got in the studio, late 2004 with this other metal producer called Rezi. I'll say, it was completed by the end of 2004, this album, but it was unleashed on the world in 2005 because I think it was the record label. They were waiting on an opportune moment to drop an album, and it's not really. You don't really get a lot of really, hit albums at the ends of years. That's more Christmas single time, I guess. But there's always, how is the album? There's always this big fear with old bands that, reunite with the quote-unquote original members that any work that they're going to make won't live up to their past glory. That the albums are essentially going to be an excuse for the band to go on tour again and play the old hits, that they're just going through the motions and writing the songs in autopilot. Thankfully, that's not so much the case with Angel of Retribution. Rather, this album feels like a direct continuation of Painkiller, honestly. As perhaps is to be expected of a band that was catching up on old times with their frontman, this album is actually loaded with a lot of references and callbacks to Priest's past. The opening track, Judas Rising, literally begins with a faded-in twin guitar intro a la Sad Music Destiny, before launching into a furious double-kick-driven attack which sounds like something straight up of Painkiller. Deal with the Devil is a straightforward rocker of the song which details Priest's early history, barely scraping by while signing the goal into the adoption of the leather and studs. The title drops both Blood Red Skies and Take on the World. Revolution is this absolute headbanger of a track, which is actually built on an unused Priest riff, recorded all the way back in the 1970s. Worth Fighting For is something of a companion track to Desert Plains. Demonizer, it references the Hellion and Painkiller. Hellrider, name drops Ram It Down and Tyrant. Eulogy references Stained Class and Sentinel. You get the idea. Some people might see this sort of thing as pandering, and, I get that, but personally, I don't really mind, since the references are sort of, blink and you miss it. It's not the sort of corny callback you hear on, say, Parental Guidance, where the band literally sings a past line with its original melody. Oh yeah, did I mention that they do that on Parental Guidance? That's another reason why Turbo sucks. Chalk that up. Besides, the rest of the lyrics, they're focused on charting out classic Priest territory. You know, songs about mythological creatures, burning rubber, and generally being metal badasses. Plus, the band, they make efforts on this album. They show that they definitely didn't consider this album a shoe-in. You know, Rob Halford singing, like I said, it's still just as sharp, just as shrill, as harsh as it was back on Painkiller. It may be a little more strained because of his age. The band also, they meanwhile continue to deliver on killer licks and grooves. Demonizer in particular is a powerful track that shifts between these triple and duple meters, all while the rhythm section is pounding away in the background. Angel is this beautiful track which starts off acoustic and builds into a heavy climax a la Dreamer Deceiver, but I'd argue that Angel is a bit more dry than that track. It's sort of like a cross between Dreamer Deceiver and Beyond the Realm of Death in that regard. Hellrider is an adventure of a song with a thrilling solo section. Almost out of the blue, the band created their longest song for this album with Walkers. It runs at about 13 minutes, 30 seconds, and it goes through various different sounds, from an atmospheric guitar line against lapping waves at the start, to a sludgy doom metal verse, to a chant chorus beckoning the titular lake to reveal its monstrous secrets. I mean, tree fitty. To an extended solo section with a softer section of electric guitar soundscapes, and oh my gosh, this is a juggernaut of a track. Does it need to be 13 minutes long? Hell no, definitely not. Honestly, they probably could have cut it down to 8, but it's got some heavy grooves and great playing, so I'd say it's a pretty good closer. Still though, you know, in spite of the highs of the Painkiller band firing on all cylinders, I can't deny that this album is essentially just more of the same old Judas Priest. This isn't so bad or noticeable for most of the album because, hey, you know, I like old Judas Priest, but tracks like Worth Fighting For and Wheels of Fire, they're essentially just 80s Priest tracks with the date filed off, and they're meh. Eulogy is an emotional orchestral ballad in the vein of Epitaph on Sad Winds of Destiny, and I suppose it's fine, but like Epitaph, I wouldn't listen to it on my own outside of the context of this album. Also, I forgot to mention, what was it? Again, I forgot to mention this album cover here, but, you know, it's also pretty cool. I think it's a callback to the previous album. I think, actually, this and the track Judas Rising are meant to connect with Angel on the cover from Sad Winds of Destiny. You know, he used to be burning in hell and suffering and all that, but now he's rising. He's made his way up, and, you know, he's coated in armor, and he's a warrior, and he's strong, and like that. You know, Priest are back. It's essentially meant to say that sort of thing. But, you know, is this album charting any new ground for Priest? Not really, but after the past 2 Ripper albums attempting and failing to fuse Priest with contemporary metal trends, this album feels like a breath of fresh air as the band they're just being themselves. I feel good giving this album a B, so, you know, as far as reunion albums go for bands, this one is actually pretty damn good. I would recommend checking it out. Another sip here. Okay, so Angel. It was a success on the charts, and Priest's tour and support was once again successful, if a bit less so than Priest at their height. Still, the band carried on, and they began thinking big for their follow-up. They wanted to do a concept album. They wanted to incorporate synths, orchestra, choir, and other sorts of sonic textures. Something more ambitious, more progressive than the band had attempted in years. And all this for a biographical narrative about the life of Nostradamus, famed future seer and occultist. The album, simply titled Nostradamus, would take a few years to come together, but it eventually came out in 2008. Honestly, given that information alone, this sounds pretty hype. You know, Judas Priest, concept album, more sonic textures, sign me up. So how is it? Well, oh god. It's best we take it blow by blow. So the album, right? The fitting of the conceptual approach. It begins with this orchestral instrumental, Dawn of Creation. Gradually, it's nice. It gives way to this eerie, electric underbelly before exploding into Prophecy, a mid-tempo rocker which is a neat balance of symphonic drama and Priest's metal edge. This song it also introduces us to Nostradamus and his gift of future sight. The band, they haven't been this prog rock in spirit since arguably the Rocka Rolla days, if not like Sad Rings of Destiny and Sin After Sin. And I'm not gonna lie, with these two tracks here, Dawn of Creation leading into Prophecy, it's pretty good. I think the album starts with a lot of promise. And then you look at the album's 102-minute, 48-second runtime on Wikipedia, and you get that pit in your stomach again. Oh god, how are they gonna justify this time? Spoiler alert, they really do not. Well, as the first track should be clear, there are a lot more instrumental/short song interludes this time around, with a lot of acoustic guitars, synths, orchestras, and Rob Halford bellowing, being dramatic and stuff. Some are pretty effective at setting atmosphere for incoming tracks like Awakening, The Four Horsemen, Peace, and Calm Before the Storm. Others are just there, I guess, like Solitude. Others are just recapitulations of themes. Sands of Time is just more Nostradamus spreading the future. Believe me, there's a lot of that on this album. Shadows of the Flame is more Nostradamus grieving over his love. And Hope is Nostradamus reconnecting with his love? I'm not really sure. It's not clear sometimes. Well, that's all under. But that's just the short instrumental stuff. What about the meat of the album itself? What of the longer, rockin' Judas Priest tracks, right? Well, Revelations is another appropriate dramatic rocker as Nostradamus comes to grips with his ability to see the future for the first time. It's the first Priest song with a classical guitar solo, which comes out of nowhere, but, I dig. The electric solos are also great, too. And you've got War, which is another Priest verse. It's this organ-driven rocker, built on the Devil's Third. Hello again, Gustav Holst. You keep popping up in these metal songs. It's got pounding drums all like Children of the Grave by Black Sabbath, and at one point it even enters this march-like section appropriate to the title. It kind of rocks a little less, honestly. It sounds a bit more like Judas Priest the musical. Pestilence and Plague is it's a little better, built on galloping riffs and beautiful twin harmonies and the guitars, and a propulsive drum part while Rob Halford sings an Italian chorus. Oh hell yeah, baby, ham it up. This is Judas Priest the opera now. But then you got Death, which is this sludgier rocker where Rob Halford gets in some chilling low tones as he sings from the perspective of like one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, Death. There's a tolling bell in the background at one point, which reminds me a lot of Black Sabbath, and also like Sabbath at one point it kind of changes into this entirely different swung section for a solo. Song's pretty decent. I like it. It's decent. Then you got Conquest is this cheesy mid-tempo rocker whose lyrics I can't really parse. I feel like some of this album's lyrics are flying over my head a bit, given how layered Nostradamus' divination was. And I don't know, maybe the band might be running a bit more into the Nostradamus story than I'm familiar with, but that's my excuse. Lost Love, it's this unironic love ballad backed by synth and orchestra with a tame guitar solo. It's lovely, but it's about the least Judas Priest thing I can think of. Judas Priest the musical indeed. And that song leads directly into Persecution, which is a fiery rocker, as in the narrative, Nostradamus is confronted by the church for what they see as his heresies. It's appropriately defiant, and honestly, it kind of works with what Priest has always been about. If you look back to the rebellious, hot-headed songs of the earlier days, like, breaking the law, under the hand of persecution, define the institution. Damn, fucking sing it, Rob. We're down with the system. But that's the end of the first side of, well, not first side, first disc of a double album. This is a double album, yeah. The first disc, and the second, oh god. Okay, the second side. Let's just rip the Band-Aid off. It starts with Exile, which is this sentimental ballad that I think it's Nostradamus at this point is, fleeing wherever he's from. He's lamenting that he's in exile. It's alright. Verges on Judas Priest musical territory where it feels very melodramatic. I don't know. Alone follows up on Exile as an angrier, slow rocker where Nostradamus gives up on humanity. It's alright. Still a bit melodramatic though. Visions is another mid-tempo symphonic rocker with Nostradamus musing about his ability to see the future. Good God, this musical is repetitive. The instrumental is sort of neat, I suppose, for calling Metal Gods in part, but man, by this point in the album, I'm bored. Then there's New Beginnings, which is another goddamn love ballad. Oh my, come the fuck on! What? Give me the metal. Sorry, getting too heated here. It's a decent song, It's got a grand piano in the background. It just sounds so un-Priest. I'm sorry, But finally, after blue-balling us for most of the second disc, the band finally delivers us a juggernaut of a rocker in the title track, Nostradamus. I actually remember this song from around the time it came out, and I remember loving it, like hearing it on like Sirius XM. I think my mom had like Sirius XM radio, and I managed to catch it on there a few times. And honestly, even now, this song is almost on par with Painkiller. The band gets some incredible time in this song. Travis's kick drum shines through. The riffs are nice and crunchy. And Halford, he delivers an incredibly dramatic vocal and even gets a few good shrieks in there. Sadly, the album doesn't really close as well. It closes with The Future of Mankind, which is another slow symphonic rocker and the longest song on the album at 8.5 minutes. No, I gave Lockness a pass last time because it came at the end of a better paced album. At this point though, I've heard this exact same tone earlier like several times on Nostradamus, and I'm just bored and I want this album to end. God, what a track. It's fine, it's a fine closer, there are cool guitar solos, Halford speaks in French at the end. Meh. So that's the track list, but I should still note something, namely that this album's production isn't necessarily the best in the world either. For the first time, the album was self-produced by the band. That's right, namely guitarist Glenn Tipton and KK Downing. They took the reins on this, and they do an alright job. Everything sort of feels compressed together and in your face when everything's full blast. It just feels so loud when it should feel a lot more open, if not scaled back a bit altogether, maybe do away with some of the choirs, some of the synths, some of the orchestras. It's just so much production. God, I really wanted to love this album. I really did. As a prog rock, concept album guy, I really wanted to love this album because, it's Judas Priest. Judas Priest are fucking awesome. Concept albums are fucking awesome. But this album, it's just so repetitive, so melodramatic. so inconsistent, so out there, and so long. Okay, Halford, to be fair, he was really proud of this album. He wants to play it all live one day, and he thinks that it's going to be appreciated as a classic someday, you know? Look, this project, it's got a grand sound to it, and I can see why it would be appealing in that way. And there are some great songs here and there. There are some great highlights, you know, Persecution, Nostradamus. There's some songs to be proud of, for sure, but The Wall, this ain't. This is Judas Priest venturing out of their comfort zone very nakedly, and, you know, I respect that, but it's just too goddamn messy. This gets a D. I'm sorry, this gets a D. I wanted to love this, but this is so bad. So what else have we got going here? Okay, so sorry about that. So I lost my place in things here. But anyways, Redeemer of Souls was the follow-up album to Nostradamus, and you know, originally it was going to be the final Priest album in general. Sorry, let me backtrack and explain. After Nostradamus failed to be the revolutionary album that the band was hoping it to be, they spent the next year or so on the road, at first in well, quote-unquote support of the album, but you know, as what was it? In support of Nostradamus, but then to celebrate the 30th anniversary of British Steel, they played the album in its entirety on live shows, and I think they still played some Nostradamus songs, but you know, you could tell they were clearly, you know, getting out there and playing the oldies at this point. There was a mood in the band, though, that things were winding down, so in late 2010, I think the band announced a farewell tour, which was called the Epitaph Tour, fittingly, and it was going to run from 2011 to 2012. But just before the tour, KK Downing quit the band in frustration. He later cite lack of respect towards his contributions to the band, lack of polish in the band's recent live shows, and you know, the two sides have just been sniping at each other in the years since. But honestly, I don't really have a stake in the game either way. I don't really care. It more so feels like the grievances of, like, you know, two old friends, two old, like, people who've known each other for a long time at this point. I don't know. In either case, the band brought on young guitarist Richie Faulkner to keep going, and all of a sudden, the Epitaph Tour wasn't any longer the band's epitaph, but it was instead a prelude. Funny, Epitaph turning into prelude. Sad things of Destiny jokes. Heyo! But the band, they caught a second wind with Richie Faulkner, and I guess they decided they would record a new album. It wouldn't be their last album, but it would be a continuation of their sound. Once again, it would take a few years to gel, like Nostradamus, but the result, Redeemer of Souls, came out eventually in 2014. This album, it's a stripped-down return to basics after the rock opera, which came before. That said, it's still chock full of fantasy and mythology references this time, and, you know, it literally opens with a song called Dragonaut, which is, you know, this great 80s sounding rock tune about a fucking dragon, it's pretty metal if you ask me. Then you've got all other tracks with similarly fantastical titles, like the title track, Halls of Valhalla, Sword of Damocles, March of the Damned, and Battle Cry. You know, it's a little cheesy if you ask me, but the music sells it, so it's okay, it bounces out. And you know, it's so varied on the sound too. There's so much sonic variety. The title track is very similar to Painkiller's Hell Patrol. Metalizer and Battle Cry are two other headbangers that sound like lost Painkiller cuts. March of the Damned, Down in Flames, Hell and Back, and Cold Blooded sound like arena rockers from 80s Priest. There are even some parts of the album which sound like something that could have been on Sin After Sin or Sad Rings of Destiny, like some callbacks to the 70s. Like the driving Valhalla, and the bluesier tracks, Sword of Damocles, and Crossfire. Oh my god, Sword of Damocles and Crossfire are incredible tracks. I really do love them. They're really bluesy, really funky. Definitely go listen to those. To be honest, I'm not really sure of the differences between Richie Faulkner's playing and KK Downing's playing to comment on whether or not Faulkner's presence shot some needed energy in the band or whatever. Yeah, I mean, I assume that's the case since they no longer, they no longer were on their way out the door. But the guitars are still just as brilliant as ever, though, that's for damn sure. Tipton and Faulkner still lay down killer riffs and solos. It's honestly amazing. Like, it had been 40 years since Rocka Rolla came out, and the band was still picking up exciting new riffs that get stuck in your head. Rob Halford, at this point, he's giving his all on this album. Well, as much as he can, given his age, at this point in his life, it's clear he's the most comfortable in his lower range, as he spends a lot of time there on this album. But even he can still bust out some great highs from time to time. But, hey, he's still just as gritty and menacing as ever, if a little less powerful than in his prime. Honestly, though, the most damning thing about this album isn't its sounds or the band, but the fact that it feels like there's just so much filler. Like, it's another lengthy boy at just over 1 hour in length, and it makes me wonder, given the energy on most of the tracks in the album, if it really needed to be that long. I mean, the band are retreading a lot of territory here, and if you ask me, they probably could have trimmed down on the 80s style tracks a bit more, or at least reworked them to be a bit less generic rocky. I think Down in Flames and Cold Blooded are especially guilty of this. Secrets of the Dead also it's also pretty plotting, and it's not winning the awards for most inspiring Priest tune anytime soon. Even if it's got some neat quasi-Arabic musical moments here and there, I think it's supposed to reference like mummies and the sands and Egypt and all that stuff. So I don't know. But then there's the closer, beginning of the end, which is another straight ballad, which is an odd choice to close an album on. It's nice for what it's worth, with nice guitar noodling. I think it's better than anything on Nostradamus. Definitely a lot less melodramatic, but it doesn't really go anywhere. I probably would cut that one too. Overall, this album is not winning anything for originality, but like Angel of Retribution was to be Ripper Owens' years, this album is a solid return to form after a disastrous venture beyond the band's usual sonic palette. There are some songs I'm more excited about than others, and think the album could afford to be shorter, but it's still good enough to at least go into B tier, I think. Don't sleep on this one, for sure. Okay, sorry. Let's go back here. Okay. So, Redeemer of Souls. It came out, critics and fans were touting it as a return to form, it did well on the charts, etc., etc., and the band would go on tour, and I think, they felt confident enough about what they were doing to record a live video and live album at Wacken, I think that's Wacken Open Air? I don't know, it's the German open air heavy metal music festival, and, this would be called Battle Cry. It came out in 2016. I don't think I've listened to it myself, but I'm sure it sounds good if you're into the band's sound now. All the while, though, something tragic is brewing. You see, in 2008, Glenn Tipton had gone to the doctor and been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The disease that, unfortunately, really, it fucks your nerves up something harsh. Makes you shake and all that stuff. Michael J. Fox had it, I think. But almost in defiance, he continued performing, touring with Priest, shredding, and actually creating for several years more. But by the end of the Redeemer of Souls tour, the disease had sadly progressed to the point where it was more frequently affecting his ability to play. As the band entered the studio in 2016, Tipton continued to contribute to songwriting with Halford and Faulkner. He recorded all the guitar tracks too, pretty sure. though he definitely struggled. And honestly, otherwise, I mean, the band were in pretty good shape, and it was a pretty encouraging environment for Tipton. You know, like they brought back the '80s producer Tom Alam, in addition to getting the guitarist they brought on this metal guitarist and also a pretty prolific metal producer in his own right called Andy Sneap. At least I think that's how you say that. It's S-N-E-A-P. Sneap. And Halford, meanwhile, he was getting vocal coaching too. So, you know, the band, they were getting really serious, getting, you know, really returning to basics and buckling down. Sadly, though, by the time the album was ready for release in 2018, Tipton, he went public about his disease to the world, and he announced that he'd step back from performing live with Judas Priest. He'd become more of a part-time member, even though he was still very much a part of the band, still considered part of the Priest family. As such, you know, Priest's newest album, Firepower, which came out that year in 2018, it's as much a swan song to Tipton and his brilliance throughout the decades as it is another Priest album bursting to the seams with metal aggression. Sorry, just to point out though, look at this. I mean, it's a fiery freaking cover. It's kind of reminiscent of something like, you know, Screaming for Vengeance and Defenders of the Faith, honestly. It's very aggressive, a lot of motion to it. But does it deliver? Well, I mean, the album leans off probably with a fucking bang. It's got this title track, which is about shooty bang bang. Oh my god, it's really fucking awesome. Halford's in peak shape, screaming the song's title in the choruses. He's all like, fire, fire, and oh my god, it's crazy, it's nuts. And the band is speeding along with a good clip, and Scott Travis he's getting some more subtle use out of his double kick drum than usual. Lightning Strike is an appropriate swung follow-up, again calling to mind Painkiller. If there's something that I personally learned listening to these latter-day Priest albums and now reaching Firepower, it's that they gradually learned their lessons from Angel and Redeemer in mixing Priest errors. They started to inject some more energy into the more simple arena-stomping tracks to get them up to speed with the Painkiller sounding tracks. It's like if Les Binks had never left the band in 1979 and recorded British Steel with them. It's great. Need more proof though? Well, okay, Evil Never Dies. It cycles through several different tempos throughout its 1-minute runtime, with crushing riffs, yet more pro drumming from Travis and great shrieks from Halford. Never the Heroes, it's the track after that. I mean, it's a bit more straightforward, but I think it works in the song's favor, given its lyrics memorialization of soldiers ground up in the meat grinder of war. And besides, you know, the next track, it's actually, it's another faster tempo, faster riff song called Necromancer. And that's another absolute headbanger. Then we slow down again with Children of the Sun, but it's no less a heavy track about climate change and its effects on Earth. It's got a fantastic bridge solo, a fantastic solo section. Oh my gosh, this album is paced like a roller coaster, and it's awesome. Like, you know, I was saying like how, you know, Redeemer of Souls and freaking Jugulator, Demolition, and oh my god, Nostradamus, they were paced like shit, but they really learned here. But anyways, Guardians. It's the album, that's the song after Children of the Sun. It's the album's first moment. I mean, it reminds me of Prelude in that it's a great setup for the next track, the kick-ass Rising from Ruins, but taken on its own, it's just a pretty piano piece. I really do love both in combination though, so they should have put them together instead of separated them on the track list, you know, common shuffle breaks again. Flamethrower. It's another rocker with a killer solo and breakdown, but I feel like they could have gone maybe a bit harder with this one. I don't know. It's asking for a bit more drive. Same with the follow-up track Spectre, although I do like in that track when the band double times in the solo section. That said, the album quickly gets kicked back to gear with the swinger Trader's Gate. It's almost reminiscent of Island of Domination, but detuned, harmonic Halford overdubs included. No Surrender's a quick punch of classic Priest defines with some really cool guitar work. It's not the best or most inspired song on the album, but it's relatively inoffensive at under 3 minutes. The album ends off strong, thankfully, with a blues-tinged stomper, Lone Wolf, and power ballad Sea of Red. It actually brings back some choirs from the latter track, and I think they're pretty tastefully incorporated. It's a pretty emotional track, and it even ends on something with a dark ending. Definitely, it's more in the vein of the Beyond the Realms of Death and Angel set of ballads than it is like, your Dreamer, Deceivers, or Before the Dawn and all that. Very good, very appropriate closer. So, what do I think of Firepower in all? Well, it starts off really strongly, sags somewhere in the middle, but it manages to recover by the end. All around, a damn good effort, and probably the best post-Halford lead in the album released. It's got so many exciting and powerful tracks, and proof that even decades into their career, the band they still can create a damn good metal album. They just buckle down and focus. I think that this album is worth an A. Which, that's a hot take, it's the most recent album. But it deserves an A, if only to prod you guys and say that, yes, in the end, latter-day Judas Priest is definitely worth checking out. Except for maybe Nostradamus. But no matter how many, dad rockers maybe, go and see Priest throughout the years, they're still making some really electrifying music that, it's really inspiring. I really do like modern Priest. But, oh my gosh, that is going to wrap it up for today. Finally gotten through all 18 freaking Judas Priest studio albums, from Rocka Rolla all the way up to Firepower. And oh my god, what a ride it was. This band, even though they're a heavy metal band, they've been through so many different, variations and subgenres that, it's kind of productive to just say that they're heavy metal. You really should go in there and take a listen to all these albums and really, see which side of Judas Priest, fits best for you. Now, this, of course, is my ranking, and I really do prefer the darker, more complicated Judas Priest, but, some people might like their softer sides. Some people might like their more commercial, driving sides. I don't want to take that away from them. So, if you have, if you have any thoughts of how you'd rank these albums, obviously leave a comment or something like that. But also, if you enjoyed this video, definitely subscribe to my channel, like this video, click the notification bell. All that stuff helps me grow the channel, so please, if you want to see more Rezi content, more games, more music, do all that good stuff. So my next stream, Friday, as I've got on the schedule, I've got an Uno collab. I'm going to be playing Uno with some other VTubers, which I'm really excited for because, I really do want to be getting into doing some more collabs, making more friends in the community, and just all around having a fun time with other human beings, connecting with them some more, making good friendships. That's part of what the VTuber community is all about, I think. I haven't announced my collab partners, but I will. I think I'm gonna make a thumbnail for tomorrow's stream, and I'm going to announce who I'm collabing with tomorrow. So definitely do look forward to that. In the meantime, I have been Rezi Reviews. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode of Rezi Reviews, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.